Today is February 19th, 2019, and my name is Ellen Madison, and I'm interviewing Tom Moore, who is grandson of George C. Moore?
Yes.
Who is the grandson of George C. Moore, and we are going to embark on a great journey to document the present Moore Company. So I'm happy to welcome you here, and now the formality's over, okay?
All right, thank you.
I was excited when David approached me on this project.
Yeah.
I know nothing about the Moore Company, and so this is a great opportunity for me to do a great deal of learning, I'm sure. I was also told, not by David, but by Dick Holliday, as we were standing in line at a wake on Sunday, that you were a very humble man, very self-effacing, and I'd really have to work hard to find out your role in this whole company. So you can blame him. But David didn't say that. So I want to start by asking you, why are we here? What's your vision for what's going to happen?
We're trying to put together, I think, some understanding of the scope of the textile activities in Westerly through recent years, or from up until now.
And I'm a little bit unsure of where you see this going. Do you see a book? Do you see a pamphlet? Do you see a program? Do you see?
I don't know.
So we'll find this out together then, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Would you start by telling me what kind of history already exists in some kind of written form or?
For the Moore Company?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Nothing?
No.
How could you have let this happen?
It's just happened.
I think so.
It's just happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alan, could we increase the volume?
Yeah, can you speak a little bit louder? She's having trouble picking you up.
All right, I'll try to. Well, the Moore Company came to Westerly from Worcester, where it started up. I think it started in 1909, and in 1912, I think the family moved the business from Worcester to Westerly into a building on Beach Street.
On Beach Street. Okay.
Yeah, where we still are. You can't see that building from the road, but it's still there. It's got machinery in it. I'm not clear on who this was, but somebody had put in a few narrow fabric looms, and a few years before that, perhaps in 1905,
Here in Westerly, you mean?
Here in
Westerly. In that building?
Yes, I don't.
Okay.
I don't really know who they were, and the building, the business didn't last long, and we came, I guess, in 1910, maybe.
So,
No, it must have been 1912.
in 1912, you think?
Yeah,
that-
probably 1912.
Okay. So, if we can, I'm going to ask you a whole bunch of questions that I think of while we're talking. If you would rather just go in a straight line and talk, that's okay too, whichever you want to do. In Worcester, how long had that factory or that plant or company been in Worcester, do you think, before they moved?
Oh, I think only about 3 years.
And then why did they move to Westerly?
They needed more space, and there was space here.
Of all the places on the face of the earth, it must have been something else.
There was an empty mill with, as I understand, narrow fabric manufactured manufacturing machinery in it. But as I understand from my father, none of it was of any use, so they waited a little while and then broke it up and sent it to a junkyard.
Oh.
Well-
Are you picking up his voice now?
I have to do a check to see. Give me a minute.
Yeah, because I will take notes if you're not. Would you
I
mind
can't.
taking notes, because I want to be able to ask questions
Yeah.
and so forth. So did your family have a connection with Westerly? I mean, did they summer here or anything like
No.
that? No. So he was just looking for a mill that was already
Yes.
existing for narrow fabric
Yeah,
production then? Okay.
yes.
And that was your grandfather?
My
or your-
my grandfather,
That was your grandfather, and he was George C.
yes.
Moore, okay.
But he came along with a bunch of children that were, most of them were working age and could help him in the mill.
And they were already working for him in Worcester?
Yes,
Okay.
some of them
So
were.
some of them were, and so then they transitioned to
I think there
Westerly.
were two aunts and an uncle and my father already working in the mill in Worcester. Yeah,
Do you have any sense of how many employees there were in Worcester? That's okay, I'm going to ask, and then, okay, so then we get to Westerly, and,
Ellen, have him back up and tell you about his grandfather coming here, why the narrow.
yeah, so tell me that story.
My grandfather came to the United States in the early 1870s. He, as a boy, perhaps too young to join, had joined the British Army, the Royal Horse Artillery, and I think he'd served about 2 years when he must have been tired of what he was doing. For the amusement of some of the other men in the barracks, he was doing an imitation of their battery sergeant major, and the sergeant major walked in on this and wasn't amused by the performance, and his punishment, he put grandfather back into a recruit's riding drill, which was something my grandfather decided he couldn't accept, and so he took what he called French leave. He simply left the army, and somehow or other got enough money together to get on a ship, and the ship coming into New York, and came into New York. But on the way over on the ship, he got into a fight with somebody else in steerage, and the ship's authorities broke up this fight down in steerage and restaged it that afternoon on deck for the amusement of the first-class passengers. And I guess grandfather acquitted himself well enough in the fight so that one of the first-class passengers, a man who was going to the United States and out to Colorado to look after some mining interests he had, thought grandfather might be the sort of fellow he needed along with him in the Wild West. So my grandfather went out to Colorado, right off the ship, went out to Colorado with this man, and he worked for him for a year or so in Colorado. I guess just running errands and that sort of thing. And his benefactor went back to England. He was a member of the British Parliament, although he was an Irishman. And he went back to England and I guess soon leaving grandfather in Colorado. And when he became ill in England and died, and so grandfather was left out in Colorado with nothing to do, and he decided he would go back to the East, and he knew that there was some narrow fabric manufacturing in Bayonne, New Jersey. I think they were weaving hat bands, you know, a narrow ribbon that went around the bands, felt hat. And so grandfather went back to the East and worked at that for, I can't imagine, as much as a year, and learned that there were people manufacturing on the same sort of looms, manufacturing elastic material in East Hampton, Massachusetts. And so he got himself to East Hampton, Massachusetts, and stayed there. He married and had a family, and stayed there long enough to be the superintendent of a narrow fabric mill there.
Of all the things in the world, why did he choose narrow fabric? You haven't mentioned anything about a connection in England.
Apparently, as a boy, in fact, I can name them, English firm, there was a company in Leicester, a company named Luke Turner.
Will you spell that for me? Or Real Turner? Real?
Luke, L-U-C-K.
L-U-C-K?
Yeah, Luke Turner. And they were manufacturing narrow elastic. A use for narrow elastic then would have been for the elastic size of high shoes.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
Shoe goring, they called it.
Huh. You forget that there are even
Shoe what?
needs for these things.
Goring, G-O-R-I-N-G.
The elastic in the shoe?
Yeah. It's a term they use in narrow elastic. The goring, even for like a triangle of elastic at the bottom of a mostly fabric girdle.
Okay.
It was lace front girdle.
I remember
those. So he worked.
Excuse me, that's very impolite. I thought I had turned it off, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Well, he had worked a little bit in the factory.
Okay, so that's the connection. Oh, okay.
That was a connection.
And that was
I don't know, I think he used to say he went to work when he was 8. My father doubted it, but...
makes a good story anyway, right? So that's the connection. So when he left Colorado and went to Bayonne, he was
He was
specifically looking for something he had some familiarity with?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So then he went to East Hampton, Massachusetts.
Yes.
And worked there, or?
I guess worked there, that would have been, I don't know, 1875, I guess.
Okay.
And I think he was eventually became superintendent of the mill.
So he really worked himself up. And superintendent, I need to have clarification on too. Was that the big boss?
Yeah,
I mean-
the factory boss, yeah.
The factory boss, okay.
Guy around, yes.
Okay, so he had responsibility for running the entire mill at that point then, but not necessarily, not the president of the
No,
company
no,
or
no,
anything
no,
like
no,
that. He
no.
was hands-on in the mill,
Hands-on.
okay.
And his first name was,
George C.
His name
this
was
is George C.?
George C. Moore, yes.
All right, I don't want to get.
And then, okay, so then, are we mingling Worcester and East Hampton together, or?
No, he moved
Okay.
all over the place. And I once, while my father was talking about it, wrote down a
All the
dozen or
places that he
15 places that he
Wow,
moved to.
wow.
And my father said, would you like to have him working for you?
Well, let's see, we have you for 3 days, right?
So, anyway, he worked all over the place before. I think his family kind of tied him down to starting his own mill in Worcester, and they would run it. The
Okay.
kids were old enough to be in the business with him. And so that's what.
So at some point he got married,
Oh,
he had
yes,
kids,
he
and
got married and had several children by his first wife, and she died, I don't know when. And he married my grandmother, who was born in East Hampton with Irish parents. Her parents came from Ireland.
and do you come
And
down
she-
through
and she-
that,
and
that
she-
woman?
Yes, I
Okay,
got
the
down to
second
the
wife.
second wife,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, she was, when they were married, she was a school teacher.
So then he opens this mill in Worcester.
Yeah.
At that point, what's his position? I mean, he's the owner, Right.
He's the owner and,
He-
yeah, but I would say he had probably a son from the previous marriage, well able to work in the mill and well able to be a supervisor. And my Aunt Eleanor would have been able to manage whatever administrative, office work they had.
So it was a real family
Oh, yes, it was a-
affair then at
Yes.
that point. And at that point, were there women working in the mill? Were there mostly women or no women or young girls? I mean, we hear about glamorous factories and...
Yes, certainly women working in that kind of a mill, in a Narrafari mill. Yeah, yes, very definitely.
So where did the machinery come from that mill? Was that imported from England or was that here
I
in America?
imagine it was made probably made in Worcester by Crompton and Knowles.
Crompton and Knowles?
Yeah,
Okay, so they were
Loom
making heavy
builders.
duty,
yeah.
but they were loom makers
Loom
themselves.
makers,
Okay, so he would have bought the
Yeah,
machinery
yeah.
from them probably.
Yeah, Crompton and Knowles, for a number of years, owned Davis Standard, on the way to starting it.
Oh man, this gets very incestuous, doesn't it?
I
So
just
Crompton
don't
and
like
Knowles owned Davis Standard for a while, okay.
Yeah.
Are they still around? Are they still in business? No,
Yeah, I drive by them.
No, Crumpton and Knowles, I mean. Crumpton and Knowles, are they still in business, do you think?
I don't know what they're doing. They sold Davis Standard some years ago. And I think it's been sold a couple of times.
So they're probably owned by somebody from another country. We won't even bother with them now.
No.
Okay, so then is there anything else I should know about the Worcester Company, do you think? Okay, so then he's looking for a bigger mill.
Yeah.
And he finds this one in Westerly that was already making narrow fabric. Do you know the name of that?
I don't.
Okay.
I could
Do you
find
think
out
he
somehow.
physically moved that machinery to Westerly?
Oh, yes, yeah, very
He
definitely.
did physically move
Yes,
that
I
machinery?
I know they had there was no machinery in this narrow fabric.
Oh, there was no machinery. You
There
said
was no
earlier
machinery he could use.
that he could use, and so he got rid of that and brought in his own machinery.
Yeah.
Okay. And that building, you say we cannot see from the road?
No,
Beach
no,
Street.
you can't, but I guess you can see it from John Street.
Okay. And what's it used for today?
Oh, it's in full use.
It's a production.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
still a production
yes,
plant.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, there's quite new, some quite new machinery we put in for elastic walking.
Okay. And then where should I go next in the history?
Well, the business has run right down here on Beach Street ever since, and we've gotten out into other kinds of textile manufacturing. And
I did a little research. I didn't know about ballistic fabrics and the compression fabrics. Would you like some water? Would you like a glass of water?
okay.
I'll get you one now.
Tom, did you say that essentially your father ran the business when it came here? That your grandfather really wasn't actively running it?
Not immediately. You know, soon after they got here was First World War, and my father and two uncles were off in the army then, and came back, I suppose, in 1919. But the mill was running all the time, and they were making progress. They were getting.
So do you have any sense about that time, about World War I time, how many people were employed or what kind of business was happening? If not, you're going to go back and do your homework.
I'll tell you, I think in the beginning, most of the narrow fabric they made was for garters.
And do you know what my mother told me?
What?
My mother's 100, and she said, and I never knew this till I told her that I was going to meet you, is that my Aunt Martha, who was a terrible person, used to assemble the garters for Moors at home. And
Yes, they did that.
And she got my grandmother involved in it, and my grandmother assembled them at home for piece. I guess they must have done it by the piece.
Yeah.
And I never knew that, so you taught me something about my grandmother that I never knew.
Yes, I remember that. I remember a truck with a black truck with yellow or orange spokes on the wheels. That used to. There was a fellow named Dan Sullivan who drove it, and he delivered piecework all over around town.
Including Sunny Acres?
Including Sunny Acres, yes. Isn't that interesting? It's a small world. Yes, yeah. And you know, I'm going to invite Linda in at this moment, just because I told a personal anecdote, and so Linda can tell a personal anecdote.
Well, my grandfather came down in the late teens from Pawtucket.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if there was a Pawtucket connection with the Moore Company.
Later than then, there was. My father's half-brother, who came down with him from Worcester, I think it was shortly after 1920, the family brought out his interest in this business, and he went up to Pawtucket and went back to narrow fabric weaving, but it wasn't elastic he went up to do. He eventually got back into elastic weaving, but when he first went to Pawtucket, he was weaving collars. You know, the kind of, when you had a neckband shirt with a brass collar button, and so you could, then the collar was separate from the shirt.
So my grandfather must have worked with your father's half-brother or something up in Pawtucket
In Pawtucket.
and came down here to Westerly.
What was his name?
Leopold Schwab.
Oh, for gosh sakes.
And he worked for Moore's for 40 years.
Yeah, oh yeah, sure. Well, I'm sorry, but
Gertrude is my mother.
your mother.
Yeah.
And she
Okay.
sends her regards to
Okay.
you.
Well, give her my regards. We were, you know, from first grade, we were.
Yes, she told me that.
You can't get away with anything in this town once you
Now,
do it.
I have a question, going back to my early childhood. Moore's, I grew up on Spring Street as a
Yeah.
little girl,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Moore's, it was right there, around the
Yeah.
corner a piece. And we'd hear the whistle every morning. Was that at 10 minutes to 7? I'm trying to think.
I think it's been blowing at 5 minutes of 7.
5 minutes of 7?
In recent, at least in recent years. Then it might have been 10 minutes out, I don't know.
But it was before 7 o'clock.
It
and
was
that-
before 7
And the
o'clock.
whistle blew.
Yeah.
And that was, you knew life had started a new day because the whistle at Moore's blew.
Yeah.
Was that, were the workers due in at 7? Was that
They
kind
were
of a
due
warning
in
whistle?
they were due in at 7, I guess, and they, we used to have what's now the office building on John Street. That was an employees recreation building.
Moore's Hall.
Yeah, and it got so people were sort of coming in there and having a cup of coffee or something of that sort. And when the whistle blew, they
Oh, I know.
left there and went and clocked in.
So I'm really jumping ahead here, and we'll put all this together, but I remember that of all the mills in town, it was always talked about that Moore's treated its employees the best. And
Well, I
that,
hope so, yes.
well, no, I mean, that was the understanding on the street, and that they never unionized because
No, they didn't.
the bosses were so good to them, or the owners, or whoever it was, management was so good to the employees that they never wanted to unionize. And that was true even as an adult, when, you know, that
Well,
I knew.
I hope it's still true.
Well, tell me about that philosophy then.
You know, I'm getting into a very, very delicate area there. We've never had a union.
Well, tell me about why Moore's was different in the way that it treated its workers. What is there about your family, or you know, that did your grandfather set that tone?
I suppose so.
Were you, as a child, taught that that was an important thing to do, or
Yes.
did it just, you were?
Yeah.
so that it was something that the family talked about or considered kind of important and as a mission. And
Yes.
it came across. That was well known. Did you want to add anything else, Linda, at this point, or?
Now, you mentioned the Moore's Hall on John Street there. Now, I recall when I was little, which was just last week, they had a fife and drum corps,
Yes,
and that was a big deal.
yeah,
And they would march in all the parades. Now,
yeah, sure. Yeah, the fife and drum corps actually was a successor to a harmonica band.
oh, this is good.
Harmonica band.
Yeah, there was an NRA parade in town. I think it was about 1933 or something. I marched in it with the school kids, but I think it was 1932 or 33. But all the mills, all the people were, what was the NRA motto? We do our part. Right? It was sort of a national, it was to recover from the Great Depression or whatever. We had close to 1,000 people in there then.
Wow.
Everybody marched with their department and then provide some sort of music. They organized what they could, which turned out to be a harmonica band.
Don't you wish?
I can see them now. You know, lots of people then played harmonicas. That was one thing. And I think they had a few people playing probably ukuleles in there, but just probably not.
Boy,
Anyhow, that was a harmonica band that marched in the parade.
Was the fife and drum corps
Oh,
a significant
okay.
improvement over the harmonica band? Or?
Sometime after that, I don't know just why they wanted, maybe the girls wanted a girls' fife and drum corps or whatever. Irene Gilday, who was on the switchboard then, and Bertha Pendleton.
Bertha who?
Pendleton.
Pendleton?
She was she ran the sample room. And the two of them sort of organized the drum corps, and that went on for a long time. I think, but finally, you know, all of that sort of thing, with television coming on and everything, home entertainment of that sort just fell apart.
Now, are there photographs of that? I mean, you know.
You know, I'm going to tell you, yes, we've had lots and lots of photographs of that sort of thing, and I think they throw them away. It's disturbed me, but I doubt I can find any photographs now.
Wow.
It's just people uninterested. They had a whole lot of trophies that they wanted, parades all over the place.
So they must have had uniforms.
Oh, they had uniforms.
Oh, yeah, it was a big deal.
It's a big thing,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, all right, so those are the fun parts
Yeah.
we'd like to hear about. So go back to the mill itself.
And well,
Okay.
in this place, it's now the office. There's an open area in that office on John Street. Street. It's a rather formal office. And, for meetings and things. And that's what used to be the basketball floor. And then at one end of it was a stage. And they used to have variety shows and plays. Well, people did that sort of thing then.
Yeah.
Just for employees or for the town?
No, for employees. And then they sort of lost interest in for a few years before the YMCA did a lot of expansion. The YMCA kind of took it over and ran some of their basketball and that kind of thing down there.
In the mill? In the mill.
So even after the Y had built their building, they had kind of like an auxiliary, they used your
Yeah.
gym as an auxiliary gym?
Yeah.
And so there were basketball leagues that played in these, or was it?
Yeah. There were, well, all the factories around had teams too. We had basketball teams and
Baseball?
yeah, Twilight League baseball.
Twilight League, yeah.
The base, we didn't have any room for a ball field down there. There's not room, but there was always a Twilight League, and all the factories had teams.
My dad, I don't know if David told you or not, my dad spent his entire life at BDA,
Yeah.
and he was a carpenter, a finished carpenter there. And so the wonderful photographs of the, Dwight Brown collected
Mhm.
an enormous amount of history about BDA. So we have the photographs of the Twilight League, you know,
Yeah.
players all there.
Yeah, they had you know where the ball field was?
Yeah. We
Yeah.
found the backstop. We found a piece of the metal
Did
for
you?
the backstop up there finally.
Yeah.
So,
That was what people back in the 1930s, they used to go to ball games in the Saturday afternoon.
Yeah. yes. What other community involvement did, you know, or what other activities? We have the Fife and Drum Corps, we have the sports teams. You said there was a stage and they put
There
on
was a stage, and
programs.
there were 4 bowling alleys, but they were duck pins, they call them.
Mhm.
It's not the kind of alleys I guess the alley is the same, but it's not the kind of pins they use now. There were pin setters.
So did people come in to use these facilities like after work or at lunchtime or on Saturdays? How were they accessible?
Oh, they were sort of things were going on after work, maybe in the evening, that sort of thing. Well, Twilight League, that would be in the spring and summer. We had, as I said, we had good soccer teams. There were enough people. Well, I guess in the 1920s, enough people came over from England that knew how to play soccer.
So we haven't even talked about the ethnic backgrounds or, you know, where people came from to work. So you're saying in the 1920s people came from England to work? And was that because they had a background in weaving or in narrow fabrics, do you think? I mean, how did they find you?
We didn't do any recruiting.
No recruiting?
No, not in Europe. In fact, that was kind of a scandal. That was against the law by then, I think.
Is that right?
I think it's against the law now to hire somebody.
I don't know.
To hire somebody in a different country.
To come to work. So then,
It doesn't go on anymore, but the was a time when it did. And people up into Canada were bringing White Rock, I think, was pretty much a
French Canadian.
Yeah.
Yeah. And certainly Woonsocket,
Woodstock, yeah.
you know, hired a zillion French Canadians
Yeah, they
to
were-
come down.
They
Yeah.
certainly was sending agents to.
Yeah. Now, Linda's grandfather was German, but he came from Pawtucket, so he came because there was,
He must have known,
he knew that you existed or found out that you existed
I think he
somehow.
followed one of the Moors down here. I'm not certain, but I think he may have worked for your,
Where did he come from in Germany?
well, it was Poland.
Oh,
I guess
Poland.
it's Poland now, or was Germany. Dunskowola was his hometown. And he came to this country, and they had quite a German ethnic group in the mills in Pawtucket.
Yeah,
And that's where,
they had all sorts of turn runs and things like that. Call them
And now, when we were growing up, when Linda and I were growing up, there were a lot of Italians who were working at Moore's.
yeah.
And so when did that influx,
Right from the beginning with us, you see.
is that right? Okay,
Yeah.
right from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And so there must have been some kind of training program that existed.
Yes, we've always trained our own.
And you've trained your own people?
We've never particularly tried to hire them.
Okay, didn't try to hire from skilled workers from some other factory or
No.
some other place?
No, we've always.
So, so narrow fabric and of course elastics, I mean, that's what I think of
Yeah.
when I think of Moore's. What, I have so many questions, we'll have to come back, you know, because I have so many questions. So, that's a niche, and you grew that niche. I mean, you grew that to be sportswear, and I mean, you left the girdles behind, thank goodness you did that. Say goodbye to the girls. But you
Yeah.
developed in sportswear, and I read the compression things for medical use, and the ballistic elasticity, whatever, that doesn't let the bullets go through or something. So how did you move in these directions?
Just looking for something more to do.
So who does that? I mean, who invents those or works on them or pushes them? How does that
Well, we've
work?
always had design work going on, fabric design.
Wait, was that research done here in Westerly? Was
Yeah.
that development done here in
Yes,
Westerly?
yeah.
And then, and I'm jumping all over the place just because I'm curious here, but you have other locations. When did that start? When did you leave Westerly and expand to other
Well, I'll
locations?
tell you, strangely enough, we've been all over the place. Right now, because we've sold, in the last 3 years, we sold 3, 4 divisions of business. And they weren't all textiles. And we're down to two mills. We're running narrow fabric. We're in a very good new mill that unfortunately is in El Salvador.
In El Salvador, I read that online, yeah.
And we went there because it worked out that at a certain point, we were running a mill in North Carolina that was shipping 90% of its product to this company, to Fruit of the Loom. And
You were shipping 90% of the
oh,
product?
but maybe it
To
was,
Fruit of the
it
Loom?
was a big part of it. Yeah, I didn't realize it.
That's huge.
This happened.
Yeah, that's huge.
What had happened, but at a certain point, Fruit of the Loom just came to us and said, we're going to El Salvador, and we want our elastic supplier there with us, and you're our elastic supplier, so it was, we could have said we won't go, but we would have been out of business.
Was that the North Carolina mill that relocated to
It
El
was a
Salvador?
mill, yes, it was in Eden, North Carolina,
Okay.
and we simply built a new mill in El Salvador and sent about a quarter of the machinery we bought it new and put it in there and got it going. And then over a year or so, in stages, sent all the rest of the machinery in North Carolina down there. It's been running, it's worked out all right. I don't like the idea of all that much, but
Yeah, well,
there it is.
Yeah, you have to make those
So,
decisions.
there it is, it's in Eden, it's in El Salvador. So Westerly didn't feel that at all. We'd long since given up our factory in Westerly.
So I guess we have to go back. I have to go back. So let's go back to,
Ellen, go all the way back to the 20s.
yeah, that's where I'm headed.
Where
Yeah, yeah,
Tom's father's coming into the business and
right.
his uncles or whoever. I'm trying to get an idea how many of the family were in the business early and who was
Who was who?
who.
Yeah,
Okay, and
so,
his father's name is,
Tom's and
Tom.
mine. And
is he senior and you're junior, or did you have different?
Well, we don't use the junior, but
Well,
title.
if we're going to write up anything though, we have to be able to distinguish between your dad and
all
you.
right,
So
so I'm junior.
you're a junior and he's senior. Okay, so comes back from the war
Yeah, and went back to work.
and went back to work.
Yeah.
Okay.
uh, Same with Uncle Harold and Uncle Jeff.
Now Harold and Jeff are half brothers of
No,
your
they're
dad's,
full
or
brothers of mine.
they're full brothers
Yeah,
of your
yeah,
brother?
there were four of them. Harold, Jeff, and Cy. Cy was the youngest. The half-brother that was in the business here up through about 1920 was John, and he moved to Pawtucket and set up his own.
So he went back to Pawtucket. So he's
Well, I don't think he'd ever, I don't know if he'd ever lived in Pawtucket. Anyhow, Pawtucket's where he
Did he separate himself fully at that point from the Moore Company, or was this just another
No,
location?
he had his own separate
So
business.
completely separate? Okay, so that leaves,
Yeah. And at the time he started up, he was weaving these collars
okay,
in a tricky way so that it went around your neck properly.
Sounfortunately, there was not a great future in that business.
Yeah.
Kind of,
And then he got back into elastic quite soon.
oh, he did go back to Alaska?
Yeah.
So he competed with you after that?
Yeah, after that he competed with us, yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, so then we've got four full brothers,
Yeah,
and sisters,
two, two.
and
They were half sisters.
they were half-sisters, and one was Pauline, did you say?
No,
One was,
Eleanor and Emma.
Eleanor and Emma, okay, half-sisters, and what did they do?
By the time I can remember, they had sort of dropped out of the business.
Okay, so that left four.
Yeah.
How were those jobs divided up?
Well,
But that, well, let me start with another question. Was your grandfather still active at that point? Or was
I
he
think-
kind of retiring?
I think, he died in 1930, and I think he'd been retiring from 1920 on, probably.
Just at the same time that the younger ones were
Yeah.
coming in then? Well, you can't have 4 bosses.
No,
So how did they work this out?
well, I don't know, they just, how you do it in any business, you know.
So if,
And if you've got a business that's expanding, there are new things to do.
So who was president?
My father was always president after my grandfather, yeah.
Because he was the oldest too, right?
He was the oldest.
So by,
Yeah.
okay.
almost
so
by definition, the oldest.
He becomes president, okay.
So what was Harold's job?
He did sales.
Harold was sales. See,
Inside?
Started out in sales and came back into the factory. And Jeff, I think, started mostly in the factory and went out to sales, but he died a long time ago.
So they really did divide it up a little bit then.
Well, you know.
I mean,
yes,
it's like the Smith Granite Company. Each of the brothers
Right.
had different jobs.
Had a
But-
job, yeah.
None of them were designers. None of them were fabric designers.
Oh, my father sure was a.
He was,
designer.
okay, he learned to be a fabric designer.
Yes.
Okay.
And will you define fabric designer for me?
Uh, Well, in narrow fabrics, somebody will say, can you make this fabric and make us a price on it? And you have to take the fabric and figure out how to make it and cost it and so forth. And, is that part of designing?
You're responding to a request then, okay.
The other side of fabric designing, after you design it, run it down a sample loom, then you put it on a full gang loom, and you're having trouble with it in some way. And it's part of the designer's job to get the thing straightened out so that it will run smoothly in production.
So your dad
So
was,
it's not an artistic design.
your dad was really hands-on then, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You know, he wasn't sitting just in an office
Oh, no.
running the whole show. He was actively involved in the process.
Yeah,
And did you learn that from him?
yeah. I didn't stay with it to the extent that he did, but yeah. I know a bit about it.
So by the time that you were doing that, what kind of requests were coming in that you had to, that you had to respond to and figure out how to do? Can you give us an example of that? I mean, did Fruit of the Loom come to you and say, Tom, we need to make a waistband that expands, or
Well, you've got it. This sort of conventions, they're either 1 inch or 1 1/4 underwear waistbands, and you,
check mine?
not women.
Not women's, yeah. Men?
Yeah. And they have a function, so they all need to perform about the same way. They have to have something more than 100% stretch and enough strength to hold up your underpants. Then you get into decorative things, decorative stripes
Did anybody ever come and say, we want it 2 inches, or we want it 3/4 of an inch?
Oh, well, so we
And then-
do that too, and
So you would have to respond to that.
but you have to respond to that. We make garters, and you make those 3/4 of an inch or 1 1/8 because that's the width of the garter grips and metal parts that somebody else makes.
No
Now, when
worries.
you describe a fabric, you would describe its width. It would be a 1 1/4 inch width.
Yeah.
Did you also describe the amount of stretch it had?
Oh, well, yes,
So
You know,
describe to me a average piece of fabric that you would make.
well, a underwear waistband
Yeah.
probably, it is probably 1 1/4 wide. And, stretches are.
I thought you were going to take out a piece of elastic.
You're dreaming.
Yeah,
The stretch was what?
oh, well,
Yes, I have to drink some.
perhaps 130%.
Too much.
And it has to have a,
He'll go.
well, all of them are.
Oh, he does have a piece of elastic with him.
Yeah. That's a broad shoulder strap. And all we did is change the filling from white to, this is black. So it, instead of a white, it's something more suitable for a
You're the only man I know that wears a broad shoulder strap for a
for a wrist.
wristwatch.
Yeah, I'm the only one in the world.
I guess it works, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it works very well.
How come you never won that business?
Well, look, this is it's functionally it's great, and if you tried one, the first thing you'd think would be your wristwatch had fallen off because you wouldn't feel the buckle catching on your cuff. But once you're used to it, you don't worry about it. It's we want some more yardage, you know, at least enough to go around somebody's waist, not around their wrist. So there really isn't potential volume here.
And you can stop anytime you want. You know, just give us
You
the,
need to get the equipment.
oh, the equipment needs to go. Okay. So the equipment needs to go down to the library, but can we
Yeah.
continue?
About 10 minutes?
Or can we, yeah, or can we continue without the filming?
You're in charge, I'm just here.
But are you available to take notes? If,
My attention on this kind of detail is going to wane in about
okay,
shortly because
okay, that's fine, I just need
Just-
to know, yeah.
Ellen, let me suggest, try to take his father and his uncles through the business to when they left the business, and then you got a place to stop.
It's a good idea, yeah, okay. So, you've got 4 brothers, one dies young, and
Yeah,
they work for how long?
Until he was 65, when my father worked until he was 75, I guess. Well, we were running here in Westerly and wanted to expand, and we looked around for a place to go in the south. Most of the textile industry
Had moved.
by then had gone to the south. People who didn't know it, but it was already there. And underwear was made not up here as Pennsylvania or in the south. And so we opened a mill in East Tennessee, in Greenville, Tennessee. About 1946 or 7. And that's no longer running. Later than that, we started a braid mill. That's a different kind of way of making elastic braid, but for underwear purposes. More women's sort of lingerie. And we were making it in Westerly, and by that time we'd gotten into making rubber thread in Bristol. And
So rubber thread in Bristol.
Rhode Island, yeah.
So I'll come back to that, but did you own that mill in Bristol at that point? Was that a part of
We
the
were,
water company?
We had, it was a mill, we were one of 4 users of elastic thread.
Okay.
We had organized that mill. We eventually bought out the other 3. And
Can you give me an approximate year for that, or a time frame?
before I was around, I think about 1930 maybe.
About 1930, okay.
Yeah. And
How did the Depression affect you?
no,
1930, did it?
you know, tough to do to get business, I'm sure.
Did you share job? Did your workers work a full shift, or did they share the job, or?
We didn't do anything like that, and in Westerly, the old weavers sort of felt that they had a loom or 2 looms was the usual job. And if business got slack, and this lasted up until after I came to work. If somebody's loom stopped, they generally went home till the loom started up again. They didn't. They felt the loom was theirs, not a job. So for layoff, seniority didn't apply.
It was by the loom.
It was, yeah. Now that was only here. I've never seen another mill that worked that way, or people thought that way. But that's the way they did.
Interesting, yeah, that's interesting.
But we got beyond narrow fabric weaving sometime, I guess, probably in the 1920s even, in Westerly, and then we got into wide knitting, which is all we do here now. About 1950.
About 1950, and at what point did the present mill that we see on Beach Street, was that the previous generation that built that?
That mill was filled full of machines. think the last addition to that, no, the part of the mill that goes off to the south was built in 1925. I know the date used to be up on the wall.
Because that must have been a huge expansion
Well, it was for the, yeah.
in that point,
yeah.
yeah. And you were still,
Little.
Well,
kid.
I wasn't in the.
and you weren't, even- yeah, so, well, that's true, you weren't even born. Is this a good stopping place, David, do you think?
If you can get him to come back,
Can
that's a
can we
good
get you to
question.
come
Yeah, I
back?
think,
Sure.
Well, we haven't even gotten to your generation yet, so,
Haven't finished the last generation.
we haven't finished the last generation. So if you, and we don't have to tape you, the voice, we're gonna check the voice quality on this.
yeah.
But as long as I have a couple of people taking notes, Linda doesn't wanna do that.
Well, we'll see how,
We'll see
we
how this
compare,
works, and
yeah.
then we'll work it somehow, even if we put a tape recorder down, so that we can continue having this conversation. Does that work for you? Because we haven't
Yeah.
scratched the surface yet.
Oh, okay.
what kind of material exists to document the work of the George C. Moore Company? Are there photographs? Are there samples of narrow fabric or knitting stuff? If we were to create a display showing the history of the George C. Moore Company, is there stuff still in existence that we could put together?
I honestly don't think there's much.
Okay.
We-
So really,
You're
what we
very
need to
full
do is
of-
get your memories and build an awareness of the George C. Moore Company from that.
Well, I tell you, sorry, the Moore Company it went on to get into other things besides textiles, and there was a time when more of our manufacturing was outside the United States. This is while I was running the business. More of the manufacturing as well as sales were outside of the United States than in the United States. But we're not making in other countries to ship in here. We've operated in Ireland for 38 years, I guess. England for a while.
And you would sell in those respective
Luxembourg.
countries. And you would sell that product in Ireland
Yeah,
or in
wherever
England.
it had to be sold, could be sold. And various things, for a long time, we ran a mill making battery separators for, plates for lead acid batteries. This would be not like automotive batteries, because they, the heavy duty kind, like forklift trucks, perhaps golf carts, where you have a heavy duty battery that you run down every day and then plug it in to recharge during the night. And
So that's a whole huge.
This is-
But you're gonna, but that stuff's outside of Westerly, so you gotta
True, so we don't
decide.
need-
It's all,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I can just tell you, it has nothing to
Yeah.
do with Westerly.
Do you have family photographs that we could make copies of, or photographs of the building, or,
Your,
I don't even
You know.
darn thing.
you don't have a darn thing.
I-
Could you ask the rest of your family if they have it?
He knows they don't. He knows they don't.
Look, I've collected stuff and my office has been cleaned out, not by me. I was the one who thought we ought to be saving stuff. But we've been in and out of a lot of stuff. The company is battery separators, various kinds of rubber things. We had a marine division for 30-some years, I guess, and sold that a couple of years ago. That was not in Westerly at all. It was headquarters in Tennessee, in the TVA region, where they had lots of lakes, and none of our marine product
Which
ever
my mother-
sold water.
My mother
you know.
blames the TVA for every textile mill in the New England moving. So,
Let us pick this up again.
yeah,
Well, we
yeah.
we were quite big in things for small boats, you know, fuel tanks, seats, bait wells,